The Story King, where every tale finds its throne. The blood on her hands wasn't hers, not yet, anyway. Alara stumbled through the darkness, her breath coming in ragged gasps that tore at her throat like claws. Behind her, the village bells clanged the terrible rhythm, the sound that meant only one thing: hunt the traitor. Her bare feet slipped on wet moss as she crashed through the underbrush, branches catching at her torn dress, her unbound hair wild as a storm behind her. She'd had no choice. They'd discovered what she'd done, who she'd helped escape. The children, those 3 little werewolf cubs the village elders had captured, planning to use them as bait for their parents, for the pack that lived beyond the forest. Alara had always been taught that werewolves were monsters, beasts to be feared and destroyed. But when she'd heard those cubs whimpering in the cellar, crying for their mother, something in her had shattered. So she'd freed them, and now she'd pay the price. The forest loomed ahead, a wall of ancient trees that marked the boundary between human lands and the wild territory. No one from her village had crossed that line in a generation and lived to tell of it. The werewolf packs ruled there, and humans who trespassed simply disappeared. Alara didn't slow down. Behind her, she could hear the hunting party, men she'd known her whole life, now howling for her blood. Death waited ahead, death chased behind. At least in the forest, it might be quick. She broke through the tree line at full sprint, and the world changed. The air grew thick, heavy with ancient magic that made her skin prickle. The sounds of pursuit behind her suddenly muffled, as if the forest itself had swallowed them. Alara's momentum carried her forward for several more desperate steps before her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the forest floor, sobbing for breath. That's when she saw him. He stood 20 paces ahead, perfectly still, as if he'd been carved from the darkness itself. The moonlight filtering through the canopy caught on silver-white hair that fell past his shoulders, and eyes that gleamed like molten gold in the shadows. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with broad shoulders wrapped in black furs and leather. Everything about him radiated power, from his predatory stillness to the way the very air seemed to bend around him. An alpha, she knew it instinctively, the way prey knows the predator. Alara's heart, already racing, somehow found another gear. She tried to scramble backward, but her body had nothing left to give. She could only stare as he took one step forward, then another, closing the distance between them with the fluid grace of a wolf on the hunt. "Please," she whispered, hating the way her voice broke. "Please, I didn't know where else to go." He tilted his head, studying her with those unsettling golden eyes. This close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with sharp, aristocratic features that might have been handsome if they weren't so terrifyingly predatory. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a perpetually severe expression. "You freed them," he said. His voice was deep, resonant, with an edge that made her think of distant thunder. Not a question, a statement. Alara's breath caught. The cubs, did they make it home? Something flickered across his face, too quick to read. He crouched down, bringing himself closer to her level, and Alara fought every instinct that screamed at her to run. His nostrils flared slightly. "You are bleeding," he observed. She looked down. Her arms were covered in scratches from her desperate flight, and a particularly nasty gash on her calf was leaving a dark stain on her dress. She hadn't even felt it in her panic. "It's nothing," she managed. "It's not nothing." He moved closer, and she flinched. He froze immediately, those golden eyes narrowing. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're a werewolf, an alpha. I'm a human who just crossed into your territory without permission. You have every right to kill you," he finished, and something that might have been amusement touched his features. "Is that what they taught you in that festering village of yours? That were mindless killers?" Behind them, Alara heard shouting. The hunting party had reached the forest edge. The alpha's head snapped toward the sound, and Alara saw his jaw tighten. When he looked back at her, his expression had shifted into something harder, more dangerous. "They're coming for you," he said. The men from your village. They'll kill you for what you did. I know, and yet you ran here. To the monsters. Alara met his gaze, summoning the last shreds of her courage. The only monsters I've seen wore human faces. Something flashed in those golden eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. He studied her for a long moment, his head tilted in that distinctly predatory way. The sounds of the hunting party grew louder. Then he stood, fluid and sudden, and held out his hand. Come with me. Alara stared at his outstretched palm. Why would you help me? Because you helped them. My nephew and his friends. They're alive because of you. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. And because you're right, sometimes the worst monsters are the ones who look most human. The shouts were getting closer. She could hear her name being called, could hear the village elder's voice promising mercy if she returned. They were lies. She knew they were lies. She took his hand. His grip was warm, strong, and surprisingly gentle as he pulled her to her feet. The moment she was standing, he released her, but stayed close, as if ready to catch her if she fell. Can you run? He asked. I don't think so. He glanced at her injured leg, then at the approaching torches visible through the trees. His jaw tightened with what looked like decision. Forgive me, he said quietly. Before she could ask what he meant, he swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. Alara gasped, instinctively grabbing onto his shoulders. Hold on, he commanded, and then he was moving. It wasn't running, it was something else entirely. He moved through the forest like liquid shadow, impossibly fast and silent, navigating the darkness with preternatural grace. Alara buried her face against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady thunder of his heartbeat beneath her cheek. He smelled like pine and night air and something wild she couldn't name. They traveled for what felt like hours but might have been minutes. Finally, he slowed, and Alara dared to look up. They'd reached a clearing where moonlight pooled like silver water. In the center stood a massive stone structure, part fortress, part manor, ancient and magnificent. Other figures moved in the shadows, and Alara caught glimpses of golden eyes watching from the darkness. The Alpha carried her up the stone steps and through heavy wooden doors, into a great hall lit by a roaring fireplace. He set her down carefully on a cushioned bench near the fire, then stepped back. Wait here, he said, and disappeared through a doorway. Alara sat frozen, trying to process what had just happened. She'd fled her village, crossed into werewolf territory, and been saved by an Alpha who should have killed her on sight. He returned carrying bandages and a bowl of water. Without a word, he knelt before her, this powerful Alpha, kneeling, and began cleaning the wound on her leg with surprising gentleness. What's your name? He asked quietly, his focus on her injury. Alara. Alara, he repeated, as if testing how it felt. I'm Kieran, Alpha of the Northern Pack. He glanced up at her. You're safe here. No one from your village can touch you on Pack lands. Why are you doing this? The question burst out of her. I'm nothing. No one. Just, you risked everything to save 3 children who weren't your kind, weren't your responsibility. His golden eyes held hers, intense and searching. That's not nothing, Alara. That's everything. Something in her chest tightened at the way he said her name, at the conviction in his voice. They'll come for me, she whispered. The village. They won't let this go. Let them come. His voice dropped to a dangerous rumble. They'll learn quickly enough what happens to those who threaten what's under my protection. What's under my protection? The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning she didn't dare examine too closely. Kieran finished bandaging her leg and stood, offering his hand again. Come, you need food and rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next. Alara took his hand, letting him pull her up. She swayed slightly, exhaustion finally crashing over her, and he steadied her with a hand on her waist, there and gone in an instant, but leaving warmth in its wake. Thank you, she said softly, for saving me, for believing. You saved my family, he interrupted, and there was something fierce in his expression now, something that made her breath catch. "There is nothing I wouldn't do to repay that debt. Nothing." As he led her deeper into the manor, Alara found herself wondering if she'd really been running towards safety, or towards something else entirely. Something that terrified her in a completely different way. Behind them, through the windows, the forest stood dark and watchful. And somewhere beyond its borders, her old life smoldered to ash. But ahead, in the golden eyes of an alpha who'd waited at the forest's edge, something new had begun. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The Story King. Subscribe for more tales that reign supreme in your imagination.